Hello and welcome to week 4 of the review of Samantha Badra's King of Aspiration prayers. So before starting, let's just take a moment to tune our motivation and aspire that the next hour may in some way benefit all sentient beings. So this week's theme is crossing the threshold, or compassion. And the image is of someone sitting under the Bodhi tree under the full moon to indicate the first experience or taste of genuine compassion. In other words, we're no longer in the preparation phase, but now in the actual practice of aspiration. We may not yet have an experience of a non-dual realization of emptiness, but it's definitely something genuine, a heartfelt and authentic experience of altruism and selflessness, where we can really feel ourselves taking our first steps with our new identity as a bodhisattva. This also symbolizes the first time we actually mean it when we take the bodhisattva vow. In other words, when our vow is genuine and authentic, rather than clouded by things like spiritual materialism or self-deception. For those of us who practice Nundro, we take the Bodhisattva vow 100,000 times, and hopefully by the end we have come a little closer to being able to do it authentically. So let's not downplay what a profound accomplishment that is when our Bodhisattva vow, when our aspiration becomes authentic. Also, this week, using the symbolism of the hero's journey, this is the moment of crossing the threshold where we commit to the journey of the Bodhisattva path and step out of the ordinary world and into the world of adventure, or what Joseph Campbell calls the magic world. Once we cross that threshold, our lives will never be the same. So I've called the week compassion, because compassion for many of us represents the starting point of the grand Mahayana journey. So last week, week 3, we completed the preliminaries, and now in week 4, we're beginning the section of the Pranidhana Raja called the actual aspiration. Now we've seen the core of Mahayana Buddhism revolves around the union of wisdom, or prajna, and compassion, or karuna, where wisdom is the understanding of emptiness, in other words, the nature of all phenomena of being devoid of inherent existence, interdependent, and not separate from the fabric of reality. As Buddhists, our goal is enlightenment, but as Zonzo Khenpo Rinpoche has said, the word enlightenment can sometimes be misleading, and is perhaps more helpful to approach it in terms of seeing the truth, or fully realizing the wisdom of emptiness. However, all this can seem quite grand to us at the moment, so it's reassuring to know that we can start our journey with compassion, the wish for all beings to be free from suffering and its causes, and we can gradually expand this compassion to become bodhicitta as our practice deepens and as our view becomes more vast and profound. When teaching on this prayer in Bodh Gaya in 2023, Rinpoche said, meditating on bodhicitta and meditating on the true nature of phenomena, or shunyata, are essentially the same. So for beginners on the Mahayana path, those who have not even heard about the view of emptiness, they can at least aspire or generate the intention to enlighten all beings without leaving any single being behind. And with this aspiration to enlighten all beings, without leaving anyone behind, actually you're beginning to practice the view of emptiness. So this is very encouraging and allows us all to engage wholeheartedly in the Mahayana path. Now, before we turn to the verses of the Pranidhana Raja itself, I'd like to give some more background, since an understanding of compassion and wisdom and the related concepts of relative and ultimate bodhicitta are going to be important themes both this week and in the weeks ahead, especially when in future weeks we're going to talk more about the two truths of relative and ultimate truth. Now, for those of you who have studied the Bodhisattva path, this will be familiar, but especially for people who are new to the Mahayana, all these terms can be a little bit overwhelming, and it will be helpful to have a better sense of what they mean to support our practice. So first, compassion and wisdom. For beginners like us, the concept of emptiness can be abstract, counterintuitive, or even disconcerting, as it challenges our deeply ingrained notions of self and reality. However, as Rinpoche said, compassion and the cultivation of bodhicitta provide an accessible entry point to approach the vast and profound concept of emptiness. By focusing on the welfare of others and aspiring to enlightenment for their sake, we can start to transcend self-centered views, mirroring the non-dual nature of emptiness. This practice reveals the interdependence of all beings, highlighting that no phenomenon exists in isolation, which is a core aspect of understanding emptiness. And conversely, understanding emptiness deepens our compassion, as it becomes clear to us that suffering arises from clinging to the illusion of inherent existence. And this, of course, is also unfamiliar for beginners, as we usually think about suffering in more material and worldly terms. So, starting with compassion allows us to engage with the teachings on emptiness in a relatable and emotionally meaningful way, gradually deepening our insight into the nature of reality. So this method emphasizing the non-dual nature of Mahayana, where wisdom and compassion are intertwined paths leading to enlightenment, motivated by the wish to liberate all beings. And here, in this prayer also, we will be practicing both together. Okay, so let me say a little bit about relative and ultimate bodhicitta. So we've seen that bodhicitta is the compassionate wish to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. And it is divided into two types, relative or conventional bodhicitta and ultimate or absolute bodhicitta, each of which reflects different aspects of the path. Relative bodhicitta refers to the aspiration to achieve enlightenment motivated by great compassion for all sentient beings. It involves the practice of the 6 perfections or 6 paramitas, which are generosity, ethical conduct, patience, effort, meditation, and wisdom. And it's characterized by a deliberate and conscious effort to benefit others and oneself. Relative bodhicitta is about developing a mindset where we seek to alleviate the suffering of others through compassionate actions and the cultivation of a loving, altruistic attitude towards all beings. It's also about cultivating the skillful means or ability to engage in those compassionate actions. So ultimate bodhicitta is direct insight into the nature of reality as it is, the realization of emptiness or shunyata, and the interdependent origination of all phenomena. It is a profound understanding that goes beyond dualistic notions of self and other, realizing the ultimate nature of mind and phenomena. This insight is not conceptual, but experiential, arising from deep meditation and wisdom practices. Ultimate bodhicitta means seeing through the illusions that create suffering, thereby allowing us to act with unconditioned compassion and wisdom. And the relationship between relative and ultimate bodhicitta is dynamic and interconnected, because through relative bodhicitta we gather merit and cultivate compassionate foundation necessary for the deeper realization of ultimate bodhicitta, while the insight from ultimate bodhicitta deepens and authenticates our practice of relative bodhicitta. So put simply, we can talk in terms of compassion as relative bodhicitta and wisdom as ultimate bodhicitta, although the meaning of these words is much grander than our everyday usage. So remember, the compassion is a vast and grand aspiration, benefiting not just some beings but all beings, and not just relative benefit but the ultimate benefit of enlightenment. Secondly, it's not just aspiration but also engaging in actions. And thirdly, it's not just actions but also training and cultivating our skillful means. So compassion has a much vaster sense. And wisdom is not just about having grey hair and reading lots of books, but seeing through illusions and understanding the true nature of mind and nature of phenomena. It's not just conceptual, but an embodied and direct realization. So when teaching on this prayer in Bodh Gaya in 2023, Rinpoche also talked about how we can approach bodhicitta in terms of ground, path, and fruit. So the ground bodhicitta refers to the inherent potential or basic nature of all beings, which is untainted and pure. We refer to this as Buddha nature or Tathagata Garbha. This inherent essence is always present, despite being obscured by afflictions and defilements, the kleshas. And when we talk about the ground, it seems to focus more on the ultimate aspect, namely the fundamentally pure nature of the mind and all beings. Nevertheless, this is the foundation for the development of bodhicitta in the path, which has both relative and ultimate dimensions. So path bodhicitta is the active cultivation and application of bodhicitta through practices such as the 6 paramitas. It's the altruistic intention to attain enlightenment to benefit all beings. And ultimate bodhicitta involves the direct insight into the nature of reality. So the path involves training in both of these aspects, the relative and the ultimate. And both of these are highlighted in the Pranidhana Raja, and we'll see this as the verses progress from more relative to more ultimate in the weeks ahead. Finally, the result or the fruit bodhicitta corresponds to the attainment of enlightenment itself. At that point, we have perfected both our altruistic intentions and the wisdom that realizes emptiness, and we fully embody the qualities of a Buddha. So we can illustrate this with the analogy of a seed growing into a tree. So imagine a garden where there's fertile soil, rich and ready to nurture life, and in this soil there is a seed, which represents the ground bodhicitta. It's not an ordinary seed. It holds the potential to grow into a magnificent tree. And this seed symbolizes the Buddha nature inherent in all beings, pure and untainted regardless of outer conditions. So just as the seed's quality isn't diminished by weeds or rocks, our Buddha nature remains perfect and unspoiled, despite being temporarily obscured by afflictions and delusions. The path bodhicitta, then, is the cultivation and growth, the process of tending to the garden. It involves things like removing weeds, like delusions and negative emotions, watering and nourishing the seed, things like practicing loving kindness, compassion, the 6 perfections, and ensuring it receives enough sunlight, the wisdom that realizes emptiness. And this stage, the path, requires effort, care, the right conditions. And just as a gardener uses different tools and techniques to encourage the growth of the seed, the practitioners of path bodhicitta apply both relative and ultimate practices to nurture the seed of enlightenment. And this journey from seed to sapling to mature plant reflects the practitioner's progression on the path. And then finally, the result or the fruit bodhicitta is the tree, the garden's crowning glory of a fully mature flowering tree. This tree is the culmination of all the care, effort, and conditions provided during the cultivation phase. It represents the attainment of enlightenment, where the distinctions between relative and ultimate bodhicitta are transcended. The tree stands as a testament to the inherent potential of the seed and also the efficacy of the nurturing process. Its flowers and fruits benefit not just the tree itself, but the entire garden and its inhabitants, symbolizing the enlightened being's ability to benefit all sentient beings without distinction. So to give credit where it's due, this analogy is based on one of the 9 similes of Buddha nature from Maitreya's Uttara Tantra Shastra, although there the example is the amra or mango tree, which is referred to as the king of trees. So Rinpoche taught this some 15-20 years ago. Rinpoche also gave another analogy, which is my personal favorite, where the ground is a window. So imagine a window covered in layers of grime and dirt, but beneath all of that dirt lies clear and pristine glass. right? The inherent purity of the window. And that's like the ground bodhicitta, the basic nature of all beings, untainted and pure, obscured only by afflictions and defilements. And just as the clean glass is always present, despite being covered by dirt, the pure nature of mind and beings is always present, waiting to be revealed. So the path then is cleaning the window. So this is things like a cloth, a cleaner, wiping away the dirt, gradually revealing the clarity of the glass. Again, similarly, the 6 paramitas, meditation, cultivation, compassion, we purify our minds and uncover the innate purity and compassion that lies within. Of course, a key point here is that the dirt on the window is temporary. It's adventitious. It's not part of the glass itself, which is why it can be removed. If it was part of the glass, for example, tinted windows in a car, then it could not be cleaned. So an important study of topics like Madhyamaka and Buddha nature in the Mahayana is to develop understanding and conviction that the dirt is not the same as the window. Right? Our defilements, our emotions, our ego, all the things we're very familiar with, we develop conviction that this is not the same as our true nature. So with the window example, the result is when the window is completely clean and transparent, allowing the light to shine through unhindered. So the window is not only free from dirt, but fully embodies its true nature. And again, the result bodhicitta is the actualization of the goal of the practice. And I think this idea that only now can it fully function as a window is helpful for us to think about, because right now we may have the seed of the Buddha within us, but we are not yet able to manifest the full compassion and wisdom of the Buddha, even though it is there within us. So I suppose you could say for these two examples, the tree is a more Mahayana-oriented example, right? It talks about a seed, it talks about a potential which is nurtured and grown through a path, and at the end we have the result. Whereas Rinpoche's example of the window and the dirt is more Vajrayana oriented. Now the window is already clean, we just don't see it yet because the dirt is in the way. Okay, so with this background, let's look at the way bodhicitta is expressed in this King of Aspiration prayers and the progression of the verses. So again, in 2023 in Bodh Gaya, Rinpoche explained there are 2 ways or 2 stages of making aspirations in this Pranidhana Raja. The first is for bodhisattvas like us who are still in the early stages of our journey. And this is known as the path of aspiring conduct or the path of intentional conduct. So we have not yet reached the path of seeing and the first bhumi. So the word bhumi is a Sanskrit word that means earth or soil or ground, but it also means stage or level, right? So it has this connotation of a certain stage or level of attainment. As Rinpoche said it, at this stage we are like young bodhisattvas who have not yet become spiritually grown up. And the second stage is for bodhisattvas who have attained a direct realization of emptiness. They've reached the path of seeing, and they're now continuing their journey on the higher bhumis. And in the Mahayana, the path is said to have 10 bhumis, and the completion of the 10th bhumi is enlightenment. So as Rinpoche said, the aspiration of ordinary bodhisattvas on the path of intentional conduct is not yet really reliable yet. So initially, we need to cultivate qualities such as loving kindness, compassion, devotion, generosity, and we do this so that we might realize the wisdom of emptiness. And remember, our goal is enlightenment, which is realizing the truth, the nature of mind, the nature of phenomena. In other words, realizing non-duality. So in his commentary on verse 14, which we'll come to in a moment, Rinpoche noted that this twofold emphasis on relative and ultimate is a hallmark of the Mahayana. And so we have this seemingly paradoxical situation where we're both aspiring to purify our defilements and thereby attain enlightenment. And yet we're also aspiring to see that the universe, including ourselves and all beings, is already pure and fully enlightened as it is. So we have this desire to both see things as needing to be purified, wishing to be able to purify, and at the same time seeing things as pure, right? Thus corresponding to both the relative and the more ultimate ways of approaching this. And both aspects are richly developed in this main aspiration in the Pranidhana Raja. And the aspiration itself is divided into 16 aspirations or practices, which we're going to cover over the next 4 weeks. And these 16 are divided into 2 parts, right? So the first part includes the first 10 aspirations, which is verses 13 to 27. And these are the aspirations made by bodhisattvas on the earlier stages, the path of aspiring conduct. So these are more oriented towards relative truth, more of an aspiration of may things become perfect. They're more relatable, more understandable from an ordinary perspective, and therefore more suitable for beginners like us. And we'll be covering these verses this week and next week in week 5. And then the second part of these 16 aspirations is the last 6, which are in verses 28 to 46. And these aspirations we make after direct realization of emptiness. So that's the path of seeing, more oriented towards the ultimate truth. So here we are approaching the prayer and these aspirations from the context that it is already perfect, which also here we've seen has this connotation of infinite and inconceivable. So here it's more ultimate, more emptiness-oriented, and at the same time much less understandable from an ordinary perspective. Because now we're trying to express the inconceivable concepts of emptiness and non-duality in finite language. So we're going to have challenges of inconceivability, paradox, going beyond time and space and ordinary conception. So this is key to approaching and understanding, and indeed practicing, the later verses of the Pranidhana Raja. But of course we can still make these aspirations even if we don't yet have a full direct realization of the non-dual view. So we'll talk about all of this much more in weeks 6 and 7. So as Rinpoche mentioned, the distinction between these first and second parts or sections is based on whether or not the bodhisattva has reached the first bhumi, which is all about a direct realization of emptiness. So I'd like to spend a moment just talking about the stages of the bodhisattva journey, the paths and the bhumis. And I want to emphasize this is just a brief overview of what is a vast topic. And in the Tibetan Shedras, where monks learn to study philosophy, this is spent, many months are spent on this discussion. But in the Mahayana, we have the practice of relative and ultimate bodhicitta evolving through what is known as the 5 paths, so stages on the path to enlightenment. And these 5 paths are the paths of accumulation, the path of joining or preparation, the path of seeing, the path of meditation, and the path of no more learning. And each path represents a stage of growing understanding and realization, with both relative and ultimate bodhicitta playing crucial roles throughout. You could perhaps compare these to levels in a video game, where each level both requires and cultivates increasingly higher levels of skill. We might also compare it to different colored runs on a ski slope, or perhaps grades as we learn a musical instrument, or maybe the colored belts and levels of black belt in a martial art. So they're all parts of an overall journey to mastery, but each of these stages, or paths, can look and feel very different. And it's also worth acknowledging that some of us may not wish to get all the way to a black run or a black belt. So continuously then, as bodhisattvas, cultivating that aspiration to really fulfill our potential on this path for the sake of enlightening all beings. So let me briefly talk about these 5 paths. The first is the path of accumulation. And for relative bodhicitta, we're developing a strong motivation to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. We're cultivating relative bodhicitta through practices like loving kindness and compassion, engaging in virtuous activities to gather merit and wisdom, such as the 7-branch offering that we talked about last week in week 3. And on this path, the ultimate bodhicitta, we may not yet have a direct realization or experience of emptiness, but we're starting to study and contemplate the teachings on emptiness and the ultimate nature of reality, laying the groundwork for deeper insight to come. Okay, the second path is the path of joining, or the path of preparation. Here, our relative practice is continuing to cultivate compassion and altruistic intention, and our practice deepens. We take more rigorous training in the 6 perfections, more emphasis on ethical conduct, patience, and meditative concentration. And our ultimate practice, our understanding of emptiness, becomes more nuanced through meditation and study. We develop a strong conceptual understanding of emptiness and begin to prepare our minds for direct realization of ultimate truth. So in the Pranidhana Raja, this corresponds to the verses we're going to start this week, the verses of the actual aspiration, where we're crossing the threshold with a heartfelt commitment to the Bodhisattva path. So these first and second paths together are called the path of aspiring conduct. Right, that's what Rinpoche was referring to as beginner bodhisattvas. Now, the really big shift then is the third path, the path of seeing, which is also the point at which we attain the first of the 10 bhumis. So this is where we have a direct experience of emptiness for the first time. This transforms our compassion, making it more profound and unwavering. And our altruistic intention to benefit all beings is much stronger based on our profound insight into reality. From an ultimate perspective, we now have direct and non-conceptual realization of emptiness. We've seen the true nature of all phenomena, even though our realization is not yet stable. And this is a pivotal moment in our Mahayana path, which significantly impacts our practice of relative bodhicitta going forwards. And just to be clear, this is already in the Theravada path, the stage of the Arhat. Right? So someone who has reached the first bhumi, or the path of seeing, is no longer a samsaric being. Right? At this stage, you're no longer taking rebirth due to karma and ignorance, but only due to compassionate intention and the desire to benefit and liberate sentient beings. So as you said, this is the second part of the actual aspiration, starting in verse 28, and we'll start this in verse 6 and 7. Sorry, week 6 and 7. So the fourth path is the path of meditation. Here, our relative practice has a deep insight into emptiness, and so our efforts to benefit others become more effective and are carried out with effortless spontaneity. The distinction between self and others begins to dissolve, and our motivation is now an unconditioned and natural compassion. From an ultimate perspective, we continue to deepen our realization of emptiness and stabilize it through continuous meditation. We work to eliminate increasingly subtle obscurations and habitual patterns that arise from ignorance and block omniscience, and we steadily move closer to full enlightenment. And then the fifth path of no more learning. Relatively, we have perfected both the realization of emptiness and the practice of compassion. We embody the qualities of the Buddha. We act solely for the benefit of others without any effort and conceptualization. So ultimately, we've attained full realization of emptiness and no longer need to engage in practices associated with the previous paths. So throughout these 5 paths, our practices of relative and ultimate bodhicitta are evolving from a conceptual understanding and a deliberate cultivation to a spontaneous and natural expression of enlightened activity, leading ultimately to the state of Buddhahood. So, with that introduction, let's turn to this week's verses. So starting with verse 13. So this is part of the first aspiration, which is the aspiration for purity of attitude, which is verses 13 to 15. So 13 is, let offerings be made to Buddhas of the past and all who now dwell throughout the 10 directions of this universe. Let all who are yet to come swiftly fulfill their wishes and attain the stages of enlightenment and Buddhahood. And Rinpoche said, the incredible thing about these sutras is they are so profound and deep, but also so poetic, so beautifully expressed. And here we're beginning with offerings to all the Tathagatas, the past, the present, and the future. And we're offering all the offering objects, as we discussed last week. And he said, this is actually saying a lot, because many of us, we might have a shrine, we might make things like lamp offerings, but if we forget for a week, then we think, oh, I'm sorry, Buddha. Right? We treat the Buddha as someone who might feel left out. And these lines are addressing this kind of mentality. The Buddhas are always being offered to, right? The offering is always there, whether or not we're paying attention. As Rinpoche said, this is why the Mahayana attitudes are so beautiful, why they have the name Maha, or great. The Bodhisattva does not have a poverty mentality of, oh, I forgot for a week. So what does that mean? Well, this is taught in much greater detail in the Uttara Tantra Shastra, the teachings on Buddha nature, because there we ask, how is it that Buddhas can continue to benefit sentient beings if they have no intention? And there are a couple of answers, one of which is that by this stage, it is natural and spontaneous, right? It's become an embodied and ingrained habit. It doesn't require intention, in the same way that we don't need to think about breathing or our heart beating. Buddha activity is inherent, right? Everything is the manifestation of the 3 kayas. Another way of thinking about it is to say the causes were set in place during the earlier stages of our practice and our aspiration, and now they are continuing. The image here is things like spinning a traditional prayer wheel, or maybe more modern we could say, the universe is continuing to expand from the initial energy of the Big Bang. Yeah, likewise, the Buddha continues to benefit despite lacking intention because of merit accumulated while on the path. And as we just saw in the path of meditation, the practice is like this. It is a practice of effortless spontaneity. Rinpoche also said, right from the beginning here, we are aspiring to have good aspirations. That's a little bit meta, but I think it's a really important point, right? We're aspiring to aspire well, acknowledging that aspiration itself is a practice, and that our aspiration today is not yet perfect, right? It's still tainted with ego, selfishness, ignorance, right? And we hope to continue to improve and deepen and perfect our aspiration. And here, this idea of having a good intention or good motivation, I think as beginners we think in terms of having a good heart. And here Rinpoche said, having a good heart or good intention is already excellent, but it can be difficult to pinpoint what exactly this means. Because even people, ordinary people who still have emotions and ignorance and self-clinging may still have a good heart, or at least think they have a good heart. Our political leaders present themselves that way. Even parents think they're being kind towards their children. But, parents are still bound by emotions and ignorance, and they lack clairvoyance. So although we as parents may wish to work for the benefit of our children, and we may have kindness and good heart, there's no guarantee this is going to bring positive results in the end. As we saw last week with the story of the Chinese farmer, we don't have the wisdom yet to know what is going to happen as a result of our actions. So even though we may have good intentions, we're striving to deepen and improve our intentions, but also improve our wisdom, our humility, acknowledging we may not always be benefiting after all, so redoubling our efforts to cultivate greater wisdom and discrimination, greater skillful means. And we want to become good at our craft, like a car mechanic or a surgeon might want to be, except in this case, our craft is the craft of being a bodhisattva. So this aspiration to have a genuinely good heart can also be a starting point for our bodhisattva journey. In other words, wishing to practice or engage in practice, because we see that even though we may have a good heart today, it's not yet as genuine as authentic as it could be. Yeah, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, my religion is kindness, yes, but we aspire that our kindness can be fuller, richer, deeper, more genuine, not just our current version. And I really want to encourage you to approach this as a source of inspiration and encouragement, right? Not to be self-critical about our current limited state, but excited that there is so much more that is possible. And Rinpoche said, for this verse, he said, when we aspire for these Buddhas of past, present, and future to be present and fill all of existence, and indeed to have all of their wishes fulfilled, it's like inviting everyone to your party. No one is excluded. And literally nobody, because if all beings are indeed to be enlightened, then all the future Buddhas include all sentient beings. Yeah. So as Rinpoche said, if you can understand this idea of the presence of all the Buddhas, even a little bit, it should give you some goosebumps. Yeah, the vision of a universe that is already fully, completely enlightened. Everyone, everything is Buddha. Yeah, if we could actually experience it that way. Now, this is the Vajrayana, pure perception, but already here being pointed out and explained in the Mahayana. Yeah, it is the clean window without dirt. So yes, experiencing the presence of the Buddhas, that is experiencing non-dual wisdom, the presence, the nature of mind, yeah, spontaneous presence. Okay, continuing with this first of the 16 aspirations, verse 14. Let as many worlds as there are in all the 10 directions transform into realms that are vast and utterly pure, filled with Buddhas who have sat before the mighty Bodhi tree, around them all their Bodhisattva sons and daughters. As I hear Rinpoche said, we're aspiring to perfect the Buddha field, which is just everywhere, not somewhere specific like east or west. And yes, from time to time we will hear this idea of may the Bodhi tree be filled with endless Tathagatas and their retinue Bodhisattvas. So there is at times this relative aspiration, and at times the more ultimate view that everything is perfect as it is. Yeah, so we have both, may it become perfect, may there be lots of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and also already seeing them all. Yeah, this is a very unique Mahayana way of thinking, as he says. And he also said here, what makes a realm perfect or pure is the presence of enlightened Buddhas. Yeah, even if you're in a big city, no matter how many amenities or facilities it might have, if that place is not anointed with the presence of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, it is not a pure field or a pure realm. So as we already discussed last week, the notion of benefit or merit in the Mahayana, and in Buddhism more generally, is defined by the extent to which the conditions are there for us to practice and realize the truth. Okay, verse 15. Let as many sentient beings as there are in all the 10 directions live always and forever in happiness and health. Let all beings meet the Dharma that befits them best, and so may all they hope for be fulfilled. And here we're saying sickness is not just outer sickness, like physical sickness or imbalance of the elements of the body, but also inner sickness, afflictive emotions, doubts, wrong views, and even innermost sickness, loss of devotion, loss of inspiration, inability to maintain our concentration and discipline and so forth. And we aspire that may all our activities be beneficial, right? May all the hopes and pursuits of not just ourselves, but all beings be fulfilled according to the Dharma. So Rinpoche said, this is a big one, right? No matter what we may do, may it in one way or another lead us to benefit sentient beings. So none of our activity is mundane or ordinary. Yeah, so we aspire that, yes, if we're aspiring for long life, for example, then if we live just 1 year longer, may that year be one of encountering the Dharma, admiring the Dharma, practicing and accomplishing the Dharma. Likewise, for other beings, we aspire they become successful, wealthy, etc. And all of that because of these worldly benefits, may they gradually, directly or indirectly, encounter and practice and realize the teachings of the Buddha. Yeah, so we are aspiring for worldly benefit in order that we and others might be able to connect to and practice Dharma. Yeah, so even normal activities like sleeping or just wandering around, may that become the cause of bodhicitta arising in our mind stream. As Rinpoche said, you want to take a nap? You take a nap, and you aspire. May the power of this nap somehow, in one way or another, lead me to enlighten all sentient beings. And not just seemingly mundane activities, but even non-virtuous activities. May they, in one way or another, bring us to awaken all sentient beings. And even if it does not happen right away, we aspire that it will happen in the future. So in his Vancouver teachings in 2024, he told several stories. For example, one of Tsoknyi Rinpoche's previous incarnation, one of the Mahasiddha Taganapa, to illustrate these ideas. Firstly, that the aspiring that even non-dharmic worldly activities might connect us to the Dharma, but also even seemingly non-virtuous activities like lying, right? This Mahasiddha Taganapa would lie all the time, that this could be or become bodhisattva activity. Okay, so verse 16. Now we're in the second of these 16 aspirations, and this is verses 16 to 19. And this second aspiration is aspiring to never forget bodhicitta. So here we're looking at different practices that can keep our bodhicitta present to our minds. So verse 16. As I practice the training for enlightenment, may I recall all my previous births, and in my successive lives, through death and through rebirth, may I always renounce this worldly life. And here Rinpoche said, this is about aspiring to have a genuine heart of sadness. Basically, may I always be sad. Sadness makes humans more human. As he said, if you're a frog or a spider, he says, I don't think they have that much sadness. They're busy, or they're afraid that someone's going to eat them. And likewise, the gods are not sad because they're distracted, they're stoned. Whereas humans have sadness. But it's not our ordinary sadness. This is the much more important sadness of may I always remember all of my lives. We pray that we have a bird's eye view of life, right? Not just our current life or even this life, but all of our past and future lives. And then, as Rinpoche said, maybe you wouldn't necessarily feel self-pity, but some kind of sadness. For example, if you could see a time in the past where you were a lobster about to be fried, how would you feel? Or even this life, if you think about your life from childhood until now, as he said, I'm sure you'll have many sentimental feelings. You might think there'll be moments of happiness, you might feel sad, or maybe happy with a tinge of sadness, thinking, gosh, why did I do that? How silly I was. But upon remembering all of our lives, may we be able to have a perfect renunciation mind, and thereby renounce this futile samsaric life. Now, Buddhists are afraid to go to hell, of course, but Buddhists are also afraid to go to heaven, because in heaven we do not have this kind of sadness until the last minute. And as Rinpoche said, having last-minute sadness is not really productive. So having this constant reminder, this constant sadness and dissatisfaction is one of the criteria of this Buddha field that we're in. Yeah, so again, thinking back to our life purpose, many of us are so busy with work or life or family or entertainment or pleasurable distractions that we may not think much about the value of Dharma until it's too late. You know, we may be living in our own versions of God realms. So yeah, finding a way that we can cultivate this very human quality of sadness and then renunciation. And Rinpoche said, this is a method not to forget bodhicitta. He said some people, for example, are not able to give up their 8 worldly concerns, even for an instant. So these 8 worldly concerns or 8 worldly dharmas, they're the 4 pairs of opposites: gain and loss, fame and disgrace, praise and blame, pleasure and pain. And these are the typical sources of attachment and aversion that keep us bound in our ordinary existence of samsara and distract us from enlightenment. And so we're praying that we may be able to somehow go beyond these dualities, gain and loss, happiness and pain, and so forth, right? Going beyond these distinctions that are currently driving us. But as Rinpoche said, if we haven't yet even started that, that's a sign we do not have renunciation mind. And if you don't have renunciation, then your bodhicitta, your ability to practice this King of Aspiration prayers, is very likely still quite inauthentic, still quite self-oriented. Yeah, so always aspiring to have renunciation. Okay, verse 17. May my moral conduct be pure. So training in the footsteps of all the victorious Buddhas, may I bring good actions to perfection. May my moral conduct be taintless and pure, never lapsing, always free from fault. So this is all about ethics and discipline. And again, a huge subject. We started talking about this last week. And Rinpoche said, does the English word ethics even capture the Sanskrit Shila or Tibetan Sultram? Because in Tibetan Sultram has a lot to do with the way or the truth. So for example, water is wet. That is the truth of water. That is the way of water. It's cold outside, and if I pour a glass of water over myself, that's not a good idea if I'm going to go outside. Yeah, so that's the core meaning of Buddhist ethics. If you do something that goes against the truth, it will only bring you and others misery, problems, disappointment. So yes, of course, may I always be diligent in not killing, not lying, not slandering, and so forth. We also need that on the relative level. But it's really about, may we always do things that do not go against truth. So in the Mahayana, the second paramita of ethical discipline comes in three categories, as Rinpoche said. The first is not engaging in non-virtuous actions like killing and stealing and so on. The second is engaging in virtuous actions like helping others, giving food or shelter or medicine. And traditionally we have three categories. The first is giving material things. The second is giving psychological things like protection from harm, more inner level. And the third is giving Dharma. And then the final category is the discipline of actually working to benefit others. And Rinpoche said this is complicated, right? Because if by killing someone you actually help a lot of people, what should the bodhisattva do? And there's a big study of this topic. And likewise, we know that lying goes against our basic vows, but if by lying to someone you were to save lots of beings, what should the bodhisattva choose? And here Rinpoche said, if it is beneficial for other beings, a bodhisattva is supposed to lie. And indeed, if the bodhisattva does not lie, he or she breaks or transgresses the bodhisattva vow. Yeah, so our Mahayana vows supersede our vows of the more basic vehicle. And so more generally, bodhisattvas need to engage in seemingly non-virtuous activities if these are beneficial to other beings. Of course, there's always the danger we will fall into self-deception and convince ourselves that these activities that are driven by, perhaps ego or other things may be helping others. But always, remember, it could just be our own interpretation, our own confusion, our own self-deception. So always aspiring to maintain our ethical conduct and thereby keep our bodhicitta intact. Okay, verse 18. In the language of the gods, nagas and yakshas, in the language of demons and of humans too, in however many kinds of speech there may be, I shall proclaim the Dhamma in the language of all. Yeah, so this is another method to enhance our bodhicitta. May we utter the teachings of the Buddha in different languages. As Rinpoche said, not just teaching other humans, but gods, insects, teaching people in all languages, not just languages like Chinese or English, but different ways of communicating, because different beings have different values, different ways of thinking. As he said, how would you teach Dharma to the ancient Mexican Mayans? Yeah, they would have a game where the winner would have the honor of having his head chopped off. How should we talk to people with this kind of system? we would need a different value set, a different language, a different way of communicating. In 2023, he gave a lovely example of the YouTube bodhisattva, right? So we know the bodhisattva needs to work according to the expectations and ways of thinking of other people. So let's suppose you have a friend who always wants to watch YouTube and you want to benefit your friend. And you might think that watching YouTube is not beneficial, it's not a good thing. But if, as a bodhisattva, you were to straight away step in and scold this person for watching YouTube, then all that's going to happen is they're just going to stop coming to you. They're going to stop listening to you. So instead, the bodhisattva must begin by watching YouTube as much as the other person wants, in order to inspire them. Of course, if you're not careful, then you also will become a YouTube addict. And then, as Rinpoche said, there will be two YouTubers. Right? So you have to aspire that, yes, you want to work for the benefit of others, but you'll never become tainted, just as the lotus does not get stained by the muddy water. So verse 19, taming my mind and striving in the paramitas, I will never forget the bodhicitta. May all my harmful actions and the obscurations they cause be completely purified, every single one. So here we're aspiring to perfect our diligence in the practice of the paramitas. And also, may others have similar diligence in practicing the paramitas. Now, this is actually the only verse in this prayer which refers to the 6 paramitas, which are, of course, very central to the Mahayana path. Perhaps because this topic is covered so comprehensively in other Mahayana teachings, but because this prayer does not go into great detail, for those of you who are unfamiliar with this topic, I strongly recommend both reading the books and Rinpoche's teachings on the words of my perfect teacher, the section on bodhicitta, but also on Shantideva's Bodhicaravatara, the way of the Bodhisattva. Okay, the third aspiration is the aspiration to be free from defilements, which is verse 20. May I be freed from karma, harmful emotions, and the work of negativity, and act for all beings in the world, just like the lotus flower to which mud and water cannot cling, or the sun and moon that course unhindered through the sky. So here we're again purifying all harmful emotions and their impacts. And as we saw before, non-virtue is about anything that takes you further from the truth. Truth of anatta, etc., selflessness. For example, even harming others. We usually harm others because we have self-cherishing or self-clinging. We do not realize selflessness. Clinging to the self is the key cause that distracts us from seeing the truth. So we talked a lot about defilements last week, and I encourage you to please review that if you'd like more information. But also, as Rinpoche said, this means bodhisattvas can manifest in many ways. They could be prostitutes, gangsters, just as the lotus can emerge from a muddy lake, the bodhisattva can roam around in the stained and defiled samsara to benefit sentient beings in many different ways. And just like the lotus born in the mud, maybe if it will benefit sentient beings, I aspire to be born as a prostitute, a hunter, a politician, a robber, a gangster, but again, unstained by worldly defilements or stains. And like the sun or the moon, may I illuminate the darkness of the world. Now, the sun and the moon are great examples because they do not necessarily have the motivation to illuminate or to illuminate any particular spot on the earth. They just rise and their light reaches everywhere, so to speak. Likewise, may sentient beings receive the bodhisattva's illumination or activity, even if the bodhisattva does not have a particular preference or partiality to benefit a particular being. So again, this was covered in detail when Rinpoche taught on the Uttara Tantra Shastra, right? The Bodhisattva teachings, the Bodhicitta and Buddha nature teachings. Okay, the fourth and the last aspiration in this week is the aspiration to lead beings to happiness. Verse 21. Throughout the reach and range of the entire universe, I shall pacify completely the suffering of all the lower realms. I shall lead all beings to happiness and work for the ultimate benefit of each and every one. So always work for both the relative well-being and happiness of all, as we've seen already, and also their ultimate benefit. So while working for the ultimate, never despise the relative. Rinpoche has in the past often talked about giving people both what they want and what they need. And as every parent or coach will know, this is where skillful means are so important. How do we inspire people to do what is in their own best interests? Which is not always easy in our ordinary world. And going back to the example of the YouTube Bodhisattva, Rinpoche said, yes, for other beings to have happiness and peace and enjoyment, we need to watch YouTube together with them. But if that's the only thing we do, if we just watch YouTube, there will be no benefit. Right? So even while we are watching YouTube, corresponding to what they want, we must also do something that makes them begin to want to not watch YouTube. Yes, what they need. So the Bodhisattva must always have activity that is both for the happiness and the ultimate benefit of others. Again, this theme of this week, both more relative and more ultimate. Okay, so in closing this week, let's go back to where we started. Right, we're crossing the threshold and engaging in the actual aspiration now of the Pranidhana Raja. And as practitioners on the Bodhisattva path, this is equivalent to our first genuine glimpse of bodhicitta and our first authentic taking of the Bodhisattva vow. And this is a profound shift in our spiritual commitment, in our view, our attitude, and our conduct to ourselves, our practice, the world around us. It's a deep internal transformation from a more self-centered way of being to one oriented in altruism and compassion at its core. So let's just review how this is going to come to our view, our attitude, and our conduct. Firstly, our view. So before this shift, our view might perhaps be more self-centered, more focused on personal gain, our own happiness and enlightenment. Our spiritual practice might be primarily aimed at personal peace, understanding, liberation from suffering, maybe somewhat less emphasis on the welfare of others. But after authentically taking the Bodhisattva vow, after authentically glimpsing bodhicitta, our view expands dramatically. We start to see ourselves as fundamentally connected to all beings, and we see that true enlightenment means liberating all sentient beings from suffering. So our view is now rooted in the Mahayana philosophy of emptiness and shunyata, and we see more clearly the interdependence of all phenomena and the non-existence of a fixed and isolated self. Our attitude, before perhaps we had more of a sense of duty, an aspiration for personal growth, perhaps even a means to escape from worldly suffering. Our attitude more individualistic, more focused on personal achievement and spiritual milestones. But after, our attitude transforms into one of profound compassion and boundless altruism. A heartfelt desire to be of service to others, not out of duty, but a genuine sense of love and compassion. We cultivate an attitude of patience, understanding the path is long, and our commitment spans countless lifetimes. We also develop greater resilience against discouragement, knowing that our efforts are for the ultimate benefit of all beings. And our conduct, beforehand perhaps more personal practices like meditation, study, ethical behavior, focusing on our personal purification, doing no harm, but afterwards our conduct extends to including actions directly aimed at benefiting others. As we said, both outer and material offerings, inner, for example, protection from harm, and teaching the Dharma. And this could be something really big, like changing our job or our line of work. But it could be as simple as being more present, more compassionate in our everyday interactions with people. Here, the 6 paramitas, the 6 perfections, are the guiding principles for our conduct, not just for our personal enlightenment, but for all beings. And so, although the Bodhisattva vow is an intentional choice, we understand this transition, this before and after, is not an overnight change. It's a gradual process of deepening our understanding and commitment. And just as we may take the Bodhisattva vow 100,000 times as practitioners, we aspire that each time our bodhicitta will deepen and become more profound. And likewise, with this King of Aspiration prayers, we hope it will be a guiding light on our path, encouraging continuous reflection on our motives, actions, and our impact on the world. And as we engage more deeply in the prayer, we learn to navigate our lives with this balance of wisdom and compassion, aiming to alleviate suffering wherever we may find it. So in essence, the authentic practice of aspiration signifies a shift from a more self-centered way of being towards a life dedicated to serving others, a profound expansion of our perspective, an attitude of boundless compassion and conduct that aims to benefit all beings. And so our path is not just of personal enlightenment, but of universal liberation, embodying the ideal of the Bodhisattva in our every thought, word, and deed. So with that, we come to the end of week 4. Let's just take a moment then to dedicate our merit to the benefit of all sentient beings. So with that, thank you, and I look forward to